Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 1 of week 11, and the topic of today's lecture is a critique of theory and practice of caste, and the broader heading of this week 11 is the Dalit narrative. So, before I begin my lecture, I will discuss the topics to be covered in today's lecture. So, first of all, before understanding the theory and practice of caste, it is essential to understand the meaning of caste and its origin. Then, how the caste hierarchy is organized in the society and what we understand by the word Dalit. Then, what is the oppressive structure of caste and the type of atrocities which has been practiced against Dalit in the name of caste. And also, we will understand what we mean by the critique of the caste system, and in the subsequent lectures we will be talking in detail about the critique of the theory and practice of caste from the Dalit perspective. So, first let us understand what we mean by caste. So, since we all live in India, so we are very much aware and very familiar with the notion of caste and caste system. Caste is defined as hereditary indigenous group which decides the individual status in the social stratification and his profession. Now, this definition has been given by R.K. Sharma. Now, there are many sociologists and thinkers who have talked about caste and they have tried to define caste in their own way. So, there is no one single definition of caste like any other concepts of social sciences. We have multiple definitions of caste. So, caste is defined as a hereditary indigenous group. So, first of all, it is an indigenous group where the members they are linked together internally by certain norms, practices, rules, behaviors where they dine and marry within a group. It is a closed group. Whereas, it is also hereditary in nature because the membership of the caste is based on birth and not based on any other consideration like merit, etc. And that defines the individual status in the social stratification. So, in a socially divided society or in a socially stratified society, caste is the most important form of social stratification which divides the people along certain groups and ascribes them the membership of the caste and also determines the profession that they will choose. But we know that the caste system has undergone lots of changes, especially after independence and formulation of Indian Constitution. S.V. Ketkar, a sociologist, have defined caste as a social group having two important characteristics. So, it is a social group and the first is the membership is confined to those who are born as members and members are forbidden by an inexorable social law to marry outside the group. So, marriages are prohibited outside a particular caste group, and also you know that now the things are changing, but even few years back and now also in some of the villages and rural areas we find that interdining is also prohibited. And the social laws regarding these practices have been very strict and people used to be ostracized if they violated these social norms. Now, if we try to understand what we mean by Dalit, which is also a very commonly used term nowadays, it is a term used to refer to any member of a wide range of social groups that were historically marginalized in Hindu caste society. So, it incorporates a number of such groups who have been marginalized, who have been placed at the lower rung of the caste system, and also they were enjoying very low social and economic position. So, this is a umbrella term which includes a wide range of social groups. The official designation scheduled caste is the most common term now used in India for people in these groups, although the members of the scheduled caste often prefer the term Dalit. So, after independence in the constitution, these groups have been named and designated as scheduled caste, and they include all those groups who actually belong to the Dalit segment of the society. Now, Indian caste system is amongst the world's oldest form of surviving social stratification. So, amongst the various forms of social stratification which we found across the world, Indian caste system is one of the oldest, and it is believed that it is more than 3000 years old. And therefore, we can understand the resilience of Indian caste system and why it has thrived and survived even after the onslaught of so many invasion and changes it has faced in all these years. Now, acknowledgement and justification of caste system is found in Manusmriti, which is regarded as the most important and authoritative book on Hindu law. So, if you read Manusmriti, you will find that instances of the origin of caste and the justification for having a Varna Vyavastha, because originally the caste system was being defined in terms of Varna Vyavastha, which was based on occupation, but slowly it got degraded and got transformed into caste system. Now, in Hinduism, caste system has its root in the Varna system, which we have already mentioned, and primarily there are 4 Varnas: Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudras. And it is believed that these groups originated from Brahma, the Hindu god of creation. Now, if you refer to the ancient scriptures, you will find that it has been very well described in the form of, or by making Brahma the originator or creator of caste system. It has picturized the origin of caste system, or you can say it has depicted how the different caste groups have come into existence. And we know that in our Hindu scriptures, Brahma is considered as god of creation. So, the creation of caste system can also be traced back. It is believed that it can be traced back to Lord Brahma. So, now this caste system or these 4 Varnas, they were not placed at the same plane. They were placed vertically. They were not placed horizontally. They were in a hierarchical type of relation, because if you see the origin of this caste system in our ancient scripture, then also we find that there is a certain sense of hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy were the Brahmins, who are believed to have come from Brahma's head. The Brahmins, who are supposed to be teachers, preachers and intellectuals, and who were supposed to perform the religious duties or the religious rituals, they were accorded the topmost position, and therefore we find their origin is also from the Brahma's head. So, the next group was the Kshatriyas. They are believed to have come from Brahma's arms, and they were designated as rulers or warriors. They belonged to the princely class who were supposed to rule the world and who were supposed to protect the people from the invasion of enemies. And also we find certain qualities which were associated with the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas in this hierarchy of caste system. The Brahmins were supposed to have more knowledge of the religious scriptures. They were supposed to be more noble, gentle, religious, pious, and supposed to practice a disciplined life, much more austere in their living practices, etc. And the Kshatriyas were expected to be brave, bold, and they had to be very courageous. They had to learn the various arts of how to use armaments, and they also learned the rules of warfare. So, therefore, we can see that not only different qualities, but also different functions were associated with these 2, you can say, the Varnas which were at the top of the caste hierarchy. The third position was held by Vaishyas or the traders, who were created from the Brahma's thigh, and they belonged to the business class. They had that propensity or the talents to earn money, and therefore they were allotted to perform business, trade and other related activities which are supposed or which were matching with their qualities. So, we find that these three upper varnas, they were also ascribed certain qualities, and based on those qualities they were supposed to perform certain functions in the society. So, earlier it was believed that this division of the function or this division of the attributes of different human beings were not based on birth, but they were based on the profession or aptitude. But somehow it got rigid and it became on the basis of birth, and the most important aspect of the caste hierarchy is those who were at the bottommost hierarchical level, and they were Shudras, who believed to have come from the Brahma's feet, and they were supposed to do all the menial jobs or the jobs which were not of much respect and repute in the society. Further, it was not only the existence of these four castes, but there were many castes within these four major categories. And after the categorization of more than, I think, 1000 of caste, there are various subcaste also within this subcaste, and each based on a specific type of occupation a person is performing in the society. So, if we have to understand the caste system of India, we have to study the various subcaste and subcategories of caste to understand how the caste system is so intricate and complex and embedded in our Indian social system. Outside this Hindu caste hierarchy was the Dalits or the untouchables. So, there was another caste who were outside this or who were the outskirts, and they were considered as untouchables, who were involved in professions like sweeping the streets or cleaning the latrines or manual scavenging, whatever you can say, or leather making. Now, these untouchables were the most victimized section of the caste hierarchy. They were not even touched by the people belonging to the upper caste at some point of time in history. They were prohibited to enter the public spaces which were shared by the upper caste. They were prohibited to use the common wells. They were prohibited to enter mandir, temples, and many such restrictions were imposed, and also their homes were segregated. They were generally at the one corner of the village, which was completely isolated from the place where the upper caste people were staying. And you see the type of professions they were engaged in and the type of humiliation and exploitation they had to face for so many years. Now, the caste system was hierarchically organized based on birth, and with member of each caste occupying a specific place with fixed status and duty. The problem happened when this caste system got so rigid or rigidified that there was no scope, no hope for an individual to change his or her profession. At some point of time in Indian history, it was believed that when the caste system was not so rigid, it was believed that, especially in the Buddhist era, if you read the Buddhist teaching, you will find that they have mentioned about the possibilities of a person even belonging to Shudra and untouchable becoming a Brahmin based on his qualities, based on his merit. So, even if a person has been born in the Shudra community, but because of his qualities and merit he has reached a standard which is equivalent to any other intellectual, then he or she should also be considered as Brahmin. So, basically the emphasis is on merit, emphasis is on performance rather than on birth. But unfortunately, this caste system got so rigidified, it became so static that individuals once they took birth in a particular caste system or caste group, they were actually made to live throughout their life irrespective of the humiliation and very depriving conditions they had to face throughout their lives. Especially I am talking with respect to the Shudra and the Dalit community. The lower caste Shudra and Dalits were segregated and enjoyed lower status than the upper caste and subjected to multiple forms of discrimination and exploitation in social and economic spheres. So, first of all, I have already mentioned that if you take their habitation, they were secluded and they were segregated from the places where the people belonging to upper caste used to stay. So, this seclusion or this segregation is the first point of practicing untouchability. Besides that, there were so many other restrictions and prohibitions which were imposed on the untouchables that their life had become very miserable. They were prohibited to use certain clothes, they were prohibited to certain ornaments, they were not allowed to enter the premise of the temples, they were not allowed to use the public spaces or share the public spaces, and so on. The list is infinite. And in the economic sphere also we find that they were prohibited to engage in certain professions which were not found to be suitable for them, and they were performed by the people belonging to upper caste. For example, in the religious sphere, in terms of performance of religious duty, a Shudra was never considered an eligible person to read the scriptures or the religious text and perform the religious duties. So, such type of prohibition was existent in not only social sphere, but also in the economic sphere. And we all know that how in the educational sphere they were prohibited to gain education, to read Vedas, to chant the Gayatri mantra, and so many other prohibitions in the religious and educational sphere also prohibited their children to visit school, and they also get educated. So, therefore, they had to face multiple forms of discrimination and exploitation in social and economic spheres. Besides these discriminations, they also had to face innumerable forms of violence, physical violence along with the mental violence, which they have been facing since so many years, and that have increased even after independence, even after formulation of stringent laws against the discriminatory caste system and the practice of untouchability being made an offence. Still we find that there are instances where the Dalits are subjected to violence in the name of caste, and it is increasing, we will see as per the NCRB data. Further, there were strict social restrictions on interdining and marriages amongst people belonging to upper caste and Shudras and the Dalits. So, there was complete prohibition, and you know that this tradition is also continuing to a large extent in the present time also, in spite of the fact that we have scientifically and technologically in terms of human civilization we have progressed a lot, but this caste restriction in terms of marriage is still guiding marriages or arranged marriages in the Indian society. So, restriction on interdining may have relaxed, especially in the urban areas, but in the rural areas we find still instances coming out where interdining restrictions or prohibitions are practiced in the households. So, one could marry only within one's caste. So, it is not only marriage with the Shudra and the Dalit which was prohibited, but also you cannot marry outside the caste. So, a Brahmin is supposed to marry within the Brahmin community, and the Kshatriya is supposed to marry within the Kshatriya community. So, therefore, it has been termed as an endogenous group. The caste system was unique and regressive and have stifled the growth and development of people belonging to lower caste in the sphere of education, social progress and economic development. It is unique in the sense because such type of stratification and extremely the discriminatory practices have been witnessed in Indian society to a level which is unprecedented in nature. And second, it is very regressive. Regressive means going back, because if you see the analysis of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Mahatma Gandhi, Jyotiba Phule and many other thinkers which we will study in our subsequent lectures, they all have criticized the theory and practice of caste as regressive in nature. Regressive because it is irrational, it goes against the scientific thinking, it totally negates all the progress and development of human civilization, and it is antithetical to the democratic spirit. Because India is a democratic country and we have adopted democracy in the political sphere, but we know that how the caste system is influencing our Indian democracy, and also the type of caste, a stratified society which an Indian society is totally anti-democratic in nature. So, we can say that though we have adopted the political democracy, but in terms of social democracy still we have to make lots of progress. Now, Dalit or Ati Shudras who are at the bottom of the caste hierarchy have been subjected to practice of untouchability. Now, these Ati Shudras or Dalits which have been kept outside, they have been considered as broken caste also, and they have been subjected to a very heinous practice which is associated with caste, and that is untouchability, and we have already discussed about it. Now, after independence, untouchability, as we all know, that it is abolished in India. Article 17 of the Indian Constitution empowers Dalits and makes untouchability a serious punishable offence. But still we find instances of untouchability being practiced in some remote corners of rural India. But largely, if we have a look at the urban centers or the semi-urban centers, we find that no more there is practice of untouchability at large. Now, two important thinkers, Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, have played a very important role in abolition of untouchability in India. Now, these two thinkers are very prominent, and they occupy a very important position in Indian history, and especially towards their contribution to Indian national movement. But we also must know that besides being political leader, they were also very important social reformers, and Gandhi had raised various questions about the practice of untouchability and have seriously rejected and questioned that if we do not reform ourselves, then this type of practices will be very dangerous and it will be so much deleterious for the health of the country. And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was himself a Dalit, had experienced various forms of exploitation and discrimination in his life, in spite of the fact that he was so highly educated and he has acquired all his degrees from the foreign land. But when he came back to India, even after attaining such a great status, he was subjected to so much of humiliation. If you read his life history, you will come to know about it. So, based on his lived experiences, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar along with Mahatma Gandhi, they have raised voices, they have participated in various movements calling for the abolition of these type of caste restriction and those practices which stifle the growth of people who belongs to Dalit. But we will see in some other lecture that there are important differences between how to abolish caste system, or on the notion of caste. These two thinkers have notable differences in opinion between them. Also, in matters of caste, we find that critics have different observations about the contribution made by Gandhi and the contributions made by B.R. Ambedkar. But whatever be the case, we will study in some detail in our maybe third or fourth lecture on the theory and practice of caste. Here we must know that they both have played an important role in abolition of the caste hierarchy in India. For example, to begin with, Mahatma Gandhi called untouchables as Harijan. Harijan means the children of God, and you know that he had during his time practiced interdining with Harijans and encouraged the people around him to dine with them, to interact with them, and he has encouraged them to participate in the Indian national movement. Similarly, B.R. Ambedkar has called them Dalit, the term which is still widely used today. So, we will see in some detail that further contributions which they have made in terms of their approach and their process and methods towards abolition of caste system and caste atrocities in India. But unfortunately, in spite of multiple efforts made by various governments and making the caste based discrimination and untouchability an offence which is inscribed in the Indian Constitution, but still we find that caste based atrocities are still perpetuated in India. As per NCRB report, that is National Crime Record Bureau, atrocities or crime against scheduled caste have increased by 1.2% in 2021 over 2020. So, if you see in terms of data, and you will find, if you see the statewide data also, you will find that some states, they are really ahead of other states in terms of perpetuation of atrocities against scheduled caste and tribes. So, therefore, if we see the nature of violence, then we will find that multiple forms of violence are perpetuated against them, and some of these violence are perpetuated keeping in mind the gender biases in mind, especially against the women ye Dalit who are subjected to multifarious forms of violence. Now, what has been the reason behind this? The reason is that the notion of caste superiority and pride has been structurally, systematically and constantly manufactured, and often it turns into violence. Now, there is a feeling of pride and arrogance which is associated with the caste hierarchy. The upper caste, because of belonging to a particular caste, has a feeling of arrogance, superiority, an urge to dominance over others, and a tendency to see other castes belonging to the lower category as inferior, and they believe that they are supposed to serve them. This type of arrogance, this type of feeling of dominance is responsible for perpetuating injustices, and this is not only embedded in the mind, but it is also embedded in our social system. So, it is a systemic issue also, it is a structural problem also, and it is continuously manufactured. It is perpetuated in multiple forms, in our multiple behaviors, and ultimately it gets manifested in the form of violence when these rules are violated, when this arrogance or pride is violated, then it gets manifested as a response in the form of violence. Now, critique of the theory and practice of caste aims at challenging and critiquing the oppressive caste system at theoretical and also at the level of practice. So, the title of this lecture and the subsequent lectures will be devoted to critiquing the theory, that is all those narratives which justify the practice of caste system. We will go into that and we will try to analyze them and criticize them from the Dalit perspective or the Dalit thinkers. And second, what we are going to do? We are going to analyze how the caste relations or discrimination is getting manifested at the practical level, and how they can be minimized, how they can be countered by the counter narratives, so that we can raise a consistent voice or objection against the theory and practice of caste. So, the entire purpose of this particular week or this particular aspect of the course is to critique the theory and practice of caste at both theoretical and practical level. And Dalit narrative aims at critiquing the theory and practice of caste from the perspective of Dalits. How Dalits think? Because it is based on their experiential knowledge, based on their lived experience, based on their stories, because narrative is also a type of storytelling. They are more able to highlight and mention and analyze the injustices and exploitation which they are facing in their everyday lives. Like we see this in the context of feminism in the form of feminist standpoint theories. What is the feminist own perspective? A woman who has been subjected to domestic violence can better explain and can formulate a better understanding of domestic violence than any other woman who has not experienced domestic violence, and also not any man who has never any chance to experience domestic violence in the form in which a woman may face in her life. So, therefore, the experiential knowledge or the lived experience contribute a lot to the knowledge building. So, therefore, Dalit narrative, which was at the periphery of the knowledge system, they are now increasingly coming to the mainstream and contributing their own knowledge input to the wider understanding of the theory and practice of caste, which has already been analyzed from multifarious other perspective also. So, with this I come to the end of this lecture, which is followed by certain activity questions, very simple question like what is the meaning of caste, explain the origin of caste in India, mention the different types of atrocities practiced against Dalit, name two notable leaders who protested against caste system in India. With these activity questions, I have given certain questions on which I want you to think and develop your own understanding. First, do you think that Dalit narrative is important for understanding caste and its exploitative practices? Can you think of some reasons why caste based practices are still continuing in India? Think of some ways in which you can practice equal behavior towards your all friends irrespective of their caste. So, with this I come to the end of this lecture. Thank you very much.